Very interesting conversation. I'm happy that we're having this kind of forum. I'd like to talk about two things. One is language and communication, and the other one is building power to make real change. So the first one about branding and communication, you should never be ashamed or let anybody else demean the idea of environmentalist or environmentalism. All too often in the political debate, whoever frames the issue has the upper hand. So we, as a group, need to be pay much more attention to the poetry. We gotta use soundbite. Like when I walked in and I looked at this conservative Texas, why are those opposite when conservatism, conserving the environment, preserving the environment is the same thing? So you all have been hitting this in the conversation when you talk about connecting environmental issues to human rights issues, connecting environmental issues to economic impact issues, and then from economic impact issues to the inequity. Okay? So that leads me to the second point about how do we organize and how do we create power to change. Some of you, most of you in this room know me, and I've been doing this for a long time. I am no longer interested in talking to elected officials. Not interested. Because they are part of a system that is only supporting the 1%. So when you talk about any environmental issue or human rights or anything, it's always, they frame the issue in terms of dollars, right? And if it doesn't work in terms of dollars. So that goes back to the message. We need to really craft our message in a really good way. But what I'm saying about organizing is that I am much more interested in creating alternative ways and alternative styles, alternative ways of living with the earth and with each other, than trying to fight the establishment that is totally entrenched and we don't have the kind of organization to make those changes. So I would rather see 500 Clinic Fisks businesses. That's what I'm talking about. So you have this list of these oil people that made a lot of money. Okay, they should start doing energy business in an alternative way, in a different way. Me, I'm no longer interested in fighting and trying to convince people who I'm going to walk into their office and they're going to shut down because of the language I'm talking about. Their history. It's people like her and the people that are coming behind us, the younger people who are binary. They see lovers and haters. And so I'm just, like I say, for me, I'm turning my attention to creating positive housing, positive transportation, positive integration with the environment. I can tell you one thing that, I'll just say one last thing, and it has to do with zoning and all that kind of stuff. The single-family house is being overlooked as a defense mechanism for the environment. And of course the argument is that, oh, well, it costs too much, et cetera, et cetera. But when we talk about extended cost, projected cost, the single-family house in Austin is limited to 60% impervious cover. Is that correct? Something like that? Yeah. Okay. So when we build apartments, and I live on the north side of the Colorado River, behind me is that sea of apartments that have been built over the last 15 years. Wickersham, Riverside, all that. Sea of apartments. It has gouged out Country Club Creek. Well, so all that is building cement, roofs. A single family house has not only roofs, but it has yard around it. That soaks the water, that eliminates, that helps to mitigate flooding. The reason we're having more and more flooding in Austin is a very simple reason. In the late 80s, the law was changed and the Corps of Engineers was part of that, complicit in that. They changed the laws and started allowing development in floodplains, like Onion Creek. When I first moved to Austin, it was illegal to build housing in floodplains. And then they did like Onion Creek and now all the other creeks in Austin because we are building so much impervious cover. So I just wanted to mention that that single-family house in the argument about housing is actually a benefit to the environment. But the conversation only talks about money. So we have to not let the other side frame our conversation. We have to be aggressive in our poetry. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Plenty, and then Kelly, and then Susan.
Thank you, Daniel. That was very nice. Several things that sort of bridge what's going on here, I think. So I'm going to go to the business and money issue. So if we look at a typical family, Central Texas, and where their money goes, as if I was coming from outer space. It's not energy, it's not water, it's not food. Very high up is health and cost of money for my house. Those two things. So if I were to also go to the disaster thing, which you might associate with climate change, but can't connect those two, that in Texas, we are number one of all states with the amount of money lost in disasters, and there's 7 major types of disasters. And you go to FEMA records, county by county, and we're number one. So that, from a money loss standpoint, is unbelievable. Finally, sweet spots, this idea of common ground. Common ground, I like it better than where the line is. Because common ground says, you know, what is everyone's stake? And what was being said about home is interesting. So we as a nonprofit years ago decided, you know, we're going to become lobbyists, we're going to become this, we're going to become that. No, we're going to hone in on the home. Because the home is where everybody sits. And so can we leverage that? And the leveraging of that with the Green Building Program went from Austin, went to 33 cities, went nationally to the U.S. Green Building Council, now is going to go into the world, so we can actually say this virus of the psychology of what are you doing inside buildings, which by the way we spend what? 80% of our time inside. So if you're going to leverage the toxins, the health, the water, all these things, and package it in a way that people say, oh my goodness, this is a daily situation for me and my personal life, not only where my money goes, but just well-being. So this sweet spot, or as an organizer, where you trigger things in the community and let it just virally expand is a very important topic instead of pounding water, or pounding toxins, or pounding this, or pounding that, get the sweet spot, and come from that sweet spot and change.
Any commentary on that, or can I give it to Kelly?
I'm going to bring up a term that I'm surprised hasn't been mentioned yet, property rights. How do you deal with the sanctity of property rights in Texas? It's a very effective message to counter any talk about environmental regulation, and I'm just wondering how you change the conversation or find common ground.
Anybody want to chime in on property rights?
I have to tell this story because it's such an important part of the history of the development of this almost rabid view about property rights in Texas. It really kind of exploded in response to work that we were doing around protecting Barton Springs and protecting the watersheds that feed into Barton Springs in terms of a special category of federal protection. And the leader of that movement was Marshall Kuykendall. And it's important to understand, he was a long-time ranching family, but ranching real estate family. They basically bought and sold ranches and helped people divide the ranches and sell them off. And Marshall uttered what I think is at least an important historical perspective for people to understand about property rights at a gathering, and someone happened to tape record it, and it's since been broadcast, and I think people are rightly horrified about it. He said, on the history of property rights, the federal government first took away our property rights without just compensation. when they freed the slaves. And so there's an ugly side to some of the history on this as well. I'm not saying that all people who advocate for property rights are racist or favor owning slaves. I'm just saying that's at least a piece of the mindset. And I think everyone agrees your belief that everyone should have the right to do whatever they want with their land ends as soon as your neighbor proposes to put in a pig farm. It's all relative. I mean, seriously, if you move out to the country because you don't want any regulations, as soon as somebody wants to do something nasty or stinky next to you, you come running to the local government, asking us to intervene and stop it. So I think there's kind of a schizophrenia around this notion of property rights. And I get that there's a long history of sort of, you know, I'm going to do it my way and I don't want the government messing with me in Texas. But as Texas becomes increasingly urban and more areas that were once really rural become more suburban, there are going to be more and more of these kinds of conflicts. It wouldn't have to be a pig farm. Maybe they were going to put in a big condo development next to you and you didn't want it. I mean, we hear a lot of these things. The city council does, the court does, but we have very few powers as counties are designed. But I think it's a real issue. I just think when you talk to people who are ardent about property rights and you ask them, so you think your neighbor upstream should be allowed to pour their concentrated animal feedlot animal waste into your stream, upstream of you? Of course they say no. Okay, so, well, that's their property right. Why shouldn't they have the right to do that with their property? So I just think we have to have a more thoughtful conversation about it. And I don't know where we go with it.
I spoke at a conservative conference earlier this year about the issue of local control, and the Texas Public Policy Foundation, a right-wing think tank, was arguing that local control or like local governments were run amok, and they were passing all these local regulations, and property rights should really reign supreme. And but I said, I don't know if it registered, but pointing back to that old expression that your right to throw your fist ends when it hits my nose. That when your property rights infringe on somebody else's property rights, that's a violation of kind of the common trust. And whether that's pollution from your community, your property going over into my property and making my kids sick, or separate out the environmental pieces and say it's a frat party going on till 3 in the morning, super loud, not letting you sleep. That's an infringement on your property rights. Or somebody who opens a porn store next to a church or a daycare center. That's an infringement. That's their property right, but it's infringing your property rights to live in a community of values that you share. So I think you can counter it. It's definitely a very potent argument, and I don't know if we're always successful, but I think we have strong arguments to counter it.
There's, I always go back to education on this issue because I think a lot of people don't understand the connectivity within environmental issues. And so that talks specifically to what Bridget and Luke were talking about. A lot of people don't understand ecology and the incredible interconnection that we have between different parcels of land within an entire state. And now we really need to talk about the entire Earth and just how interconnected we are. And so educating at every single level about how somebody's actions on one piece of property affect the air, the water, biodiversity, especially we get a lot of biodiversity education out there, absolutely. There's another form of education, and maybe, we have some politicians in the room, so here's a good positive spin, right? You have the right to all kinds of funds that are available out there to improve your property. You have the right to go and ask folks at the Texas Forest Service to help you with prescribed burns, because sometimes they like to volunteer to actually come out and do that for practice. You have the right to go talk to Hill Country Alliance and Environmental Defense and Nature Conservancy and see if they'll actually give you money to build fences on your property to implement rotational grazing, which will improve your returns in the long run and make your farming and ranching practices more sustainable. So there's a lot of things out there. I think a lot of people aren't aware of the benefits, especially monetary benefits that are available to folks in the programs. That in a state where you have 96% of the land being privately owned, you kind of have to have these programs to reach out to private landowners. And that's, so putting maybe a positive spin on what's available is
You know, when I was 17 in my band, every time we practiced, the cops would come. Could not figure out what the hell. And now my son has a band. I see it from a whole different perspective. Susan was that, but yeah, let me go ahead and get her.
My question is about transition, about how do we transition to alignment with all, we can't make this thing happen with 50% of the population. And I don't think too many people in here are the conservative, Republican, other people in here. And we need everybody. So that's what I'm interested in, is how do we keep, looking at it as capitalist and environmentalist, basically, if I simplify it, and say, and I see that there's another part of that which is not about capitalist and environmentalist. When I wrote a book about environment a while back, and I did a lot of research. And to transition from oil and gas to renewables and et cetera, it's a big effort. You can't just go like that. I mean, if we're at 2%, and wind and solar are not going to solve oil and gas because it's transportation versus electricity. So, there's a transition that has to happen from how do we phase in one thing and phase out another thing. It's about a balanced energy economy. How do we balance and how do we work together and see how, there's some things in the oil and gas community that actually can be supportive of, some of the things we're doing if we start looking at it, a little bit differently. So it's like, I always use physical things. It's like this we're doing. That's a lot of energy wasted. Let's talk about energy. That's energy wasted. How do we go like that? How do we change and say, we're going that way, and this is how we're going to get there. So how do we change to transition to working together to move forward?
I do think part of it is starting with the conversation. I mean, if we literally can't even hear each other, because the words are so coded or laden with meaning that we shut down or we ignore each other. I just think we have to find a common language, or at least identify the common issues that we can agree we care about, and start there.
I just want to add, because you said, is it Senator Avery? Is that what it? You said that the conversation has changed. That and some of it I think is we see that it's still the way it was, and I know that the fight has been going on for a long time. And what if we just went, guess what? We're aligned now. We have to recognize it. Is there some of that going on? That if we recognized it and said, well, of course that we're going to work together because we now have a future. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of recognition about how things are changing, and like we've been saying, though, it's just how the dialogue is framed. If the Republican members come home to brag about the fact that Texas leads the country in clean energy, he's going to be talking about the number of jobs created and the tax base enhancements and stuff like that. And if Kirk Watson goes to a function and he's talking about the same issue, he's talking about the positive benefits to the environment. She has a different audience, but they're going to the same place. It doesn't. Do we care what they talk about as long as they're going to the same place? I don't think so.
Yeah. And so we're not against each other. We have to both be.
We don't have to be. There's still some knuckleheads.
Just drag them along.
Thank you.
First time I agree.
Yes.
Can I?
Oh, yeah. We have a line.
No, I can.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to bring it back to the whiteboard message.
Okay. Gotcha.
Whoa. Okay, little Timmy. No, one of the things when we're talking about ownership, right? Ownership is like this, the issue of ownership, who owns what, who owns land, who owns environmentalism, who owns the message, is such an endless vortex, right? It's just this vortex that we can all get sucked into, where it's not very productive, right? And it's interesting because I'm thinking about what makes a difference versus what really doesn't make a difference. And debating over ownership really doesn't. But if you shift from the context of ownership to the context of having a say, everyone has a say. So like I have a say because I'm a citizen of the world and because I'm a human being and I have a say. And good luck shutting me up, right? And you know, I have children, I have responsibilities, and I have a say in life, and I have a say in how life goes, and I have a say in the government. I have a say to the degree that I'm willing to be responsible for the say that I have. I can use the structures that exist, or I can create my own structure. But I think we have false polarities when we get into the world of ownership. There's these false polarities that get created that don't exist when it's about taking responsibility for the world that you live in, which I hadn't thought about until you said that, Bridget. And I don't know what that might bring up for anyone to comment on, if anything. But for me, I'm left in the inquiry of like, okay, if we could shift from the context of ownership to the context of responsibility, that's interesting to me. How would we do that? What would provoke that? But I think that would be interesting. So I don't know whether you guys have anything to say about that, but.
Really big shift.
Well, yeah, but, isn't it just a conversation away? Or two, or three, or four, or 10? I don't know, I'm interested.
Something that's a huge shift has to be digestible chunks, right? I mean, every big shift is a bunch of little shifts too.
Yeah.
Okay, is it okay if I go to,
Sure.
okay, I'm gonna go to Roy and then Danielle.
Okay, I want to bring it back to the conversation started around the board. And talk about a local issue right now. The city of Dripping Springs is wanting to permit a new wastewater treatment plant that will dump directly into a tributary of Onion Creek, which will then flow down Onion Creek and have an impact on the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer. Well, one of the voices that has come out to oppose that is Gary Keller, who lives right on Onion Creek with hundreds of acres. Gary Keller is the Keller of Keller Williams Real Estate, the biggest real estate company in the country. He's not doing this because he's an environmentalist. He is doing this because he doesn't want algae in front of his house. He doesn't want dead fish floating along in front of his house. But he is the one that is putting the most individual money and doing it in an ineffective way, in my opinion. But he's putting the most individual money into fighting this. So that's how we coexist. How do we not just coexist? How do we cooperate? He is a very conservative person, but it's out of selfishness that it comes down to why he's involved. And really, that's what drives most people. I like to stay away from right and wrong and morality, what we should be getting people to do, what people should be doing. You come and tell me what I should be doing, I'll probably tell you, you should be kissing my ass. So really, that's the way I look at it, is that how do we get past the labels? It's like we were talking earlier. 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, if you said, I'm an environmentalist, you might as well have said, I'm Mao Zedong. I'm Joseph Stalin. You were a communist to say that. We're asking people to look past that for us. We need to look past that for people like Gary Keller. He's on the bus going the same direction. We're not going to the same place. We're all going to get off at different stops along the line. But for as long as we are on that bus together, let's work together. We don't have to agree on everything. But let's work together. How do we build more relationships like that? How do we bring a relationship that we have the potential for with Gary Keller into a greater productive reality? Who wants that?
How do we expand their consciousness beyond that moment of self-interest and keep that conversation going?
Because we will succeed, and then that is success is what shifts people's mindset. They all of a sudden, I mean, it's the old Sinclair Lewis quote of, you know, how do you get a person to care about something when their livelihood depends on them not caring about it?
Well, I
So-
think it reminds me of the city council elections. Because in the city council elections, you had, you know, people who were Republican, liberals, independents, Democrats. You had a group of people who came together who really, the only thing they had in common was representation by their specific districts. And it was a coalition of people, and it took that coalition of people to cross all party lines, ideology, everything, to change a system that had been in power for such a long time. And then to clash with the liberal group of people who didn't want even the representation broken up into so many areas because still wanting to have control of power. So then you had a group of people who were, the common issue was representation. That was the common issue. And you were fighting people who you had commonality with, but who wanted to see a whole different scenario of that representation. So I think what's happening now, the city council is a perfect example about what's happening now and how do you continue with people who might have a different ideology. It says, how do you go and talk to, you know, the Don Zimmermans, the Ellen Troxclair and all these, how do you talk to them about exactly what's been mentioned here, that you look at it as, well, isn't it about saving money? It isn't about having alternative energy or more wind energy or solar energy, more efficient, and it's going to benefit, you know, everybody. So I think that those conversations, there are some things that that Don Zimmerman is right on when he questions the dollar signs, because there's no equity. We look at it as an equity issue. He's looking at it like the government's spending too much money, see? But we kind of have something in common there, because for us, it's like, you're right, to us, it's like they're putting too much money over there and we're not getting our fair share, but you're bringing it to the light on a whole different matter, but it's common to us and we're understanding that. So I think that, again, is how do we begin to cross those lines, which has been brought here, you know, several times, about how do we frame that issue and how do we continue those dialogues, because they are very complicated. We always say in the city government is where you can make changes in your own home, in your own backyard, in your own city, but it's always been very difficult for people of color because we don't have the money and the resources. So it's not even the same. So now we're talking at a whole different level when there is not we're trying to pretend there's a living playing field here when there's not. There's a big inequity going on, and where somebody can pick up the phone and have coffee with the mayor and talk about an issue, I'm having to talk to somebody who's a gatekeeper, you know? And so it's entirely a whole different scenario. And that's for somebody who's been politically, organizedly involved as myself. I still gotta meet with the gatekeeper. And so these are things that I think that we need to talk, you know, look at Austin as the example, and then how we're going to work with one another on those particular issues. Because I know, just like a lot of people, I felt like taking off my chancla and throwing it at the elected officials, you know, because it's like, oh my goodness, it is very hard, even with people who are supposed to represent you, represent your community. Money always gets in the way. I always found, you know, just like with the Green Council, I said they were green and then they turned another shade of green. They went from green the environment to green the money. And I saw that whole shift happen, you know, and I was going like, oh, okay, I was so happy. And then I went like, okay, now we're going to another color, green. And I see this with the council again. Money is very, very powerful and plays a big role in it, and it is more dominating for the poor, the working poor, and people of color.
Which that was the word that you led off with earlier in the conversation, money.
Doesn't matter what terminology you use, but it shifts to well-being. For a lot of people, security. And I agree that security comes from trying yourself, not from greed.
Thank you. When the question is asked, how do we all come together? How do we all get together? I think that we have to really work on our judgment. And I was talking about poetry and message and all that. When we subscribe to the labels, like I'm a liberal, you're a conservative, you're an environmentalist, I'm not. What I'm talking about is that oftentimes when I go into a negotiation with somebody who's, quote, on the other side of the issue, if I treat them like a person, like I treat anybody else, and not treat them as a developer or as a guy who's, doing this, that, or the other, or whatever hat they wear, I have much more success in communication. So I think all of us, as we go forward, we have to be careful. If we want to align ourselves with what we consider to be the conservative element, which, see, it's very difficult to get away from this binary language of conservative, liberal, environmentalist, exploiter. And I know that even someone who has a very different opinion and view than you can always find a common ground. Like what Susanna pointed out, that there was one singular thing on the 10-1, and that was representation, district representation. I go back to my original comment about our message, our environmental message, needs to be one that is opening and is welcoming to people, not something that, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Our environmental message needs to be tied to human rights and to our rights as human beings. And the whole thing about property, I will say, is that is a, look, I'm going to preface this by saying that I'm a Chicano, I'm a Latino. As a Chicano, I'm part of the Red Path, Native American culture. So from my perspective, what is happening in the environmental milieu in the world, and certainly in the United States, is a very white thing. A white thing of individualism, of property rights. All the property that's being bought and sold, that's stolen land, dude. So part of the challenge is to change the way that we view, if we're talking about the earth, the trees, the air, the water, and the people in it, then we have to focus on that as a culture. This is a culture of individualism, not collectivism. And in the Red Path, it is everything that is important, not the individual. Individuals within the context of the greater, but so I don't know if what I'm saying means anything to y'all, but there's something very big and very different here. The way that we look at our relationship to the earth as human beings, and the fact that we think we own everything. I'm 67. I was flabbergasted when in Texas people started selling water, bottled water. That is, I can't believe that you all buy bottled water. It is so fucked up. The next thing that's going to happen is the air.
Bottled air.
Dig it. I don't know. We have to. There's big changes that have to happen in our culture.
I'll come to you in a second. Now, I just wanted to chime in myself, actually, because I know that at the end of the day, we are talking about money in a lot of cases. And when we talk about things like the true cost of coal, we're talking about transference of cost from one party to another. When we talk about the property rights topic and we talk about someone dumping chicken fat upstream from you or whatever it may be, upstream from you, you're talking about transference of cost. And if we had a true system that actually measured the actual costs of everything, then a lot of this conversation would go away. If there was true accountability, true responsibility for the actual costs of the things you do and that you generate, then a good chunk of this conversation would be solved. We could get on to the next thing. That's my 2 cents, and I'll go to the next person here.
What I'm going to say is fairly obvious, but I think it's worth saying. And that is that good science is sort of the common ground, hopefully, for what we're all talking about. It's very interesting, Roy, your example. And where should that wastewater go? Wastewater should go into the land. So it's sort of very interesting, as this morning, the Austin Urban Statesman, that here there was an example of putting biosolids onto farmland. So the best possible thing that we can do, among many other things, is to build the soil. Because the soil is our biggest carbon sink existing on the planet, except for some parts of the sea. So when I go and I say, all right, do good by doing good yourself, it was interesting the other day, we have a low pressure dosage system going on in our lawn. So our wastewater is feeding our plants, feeding our flowers, feeding our vines, and shade the building. Down the road, there's a fantastic example called Purple Pipe. Now, not too long ago, Purple Pipe was looked at as, oh, let's get the wastewater used into open space, cheap water, don't use fresh water. What is Purple Pipe actually doing? And the language that we speak, hopefully, is building the soil. We are having a humongous carbon sink developing in our green space all the way to Miller, where that water is going. To interpret what we're doing and get credit for what we're doing and leverage it and explain it in a wholly different way, I think possibly is another leverage that we're not taking nearly enough advantage of.
And that's an energy issue. We have to impact it like it's selling.
Over here. Thank you. So I just want to say, I am both an environmentalist and a capitalist. I do not see that they have to be in conflict. I came from IBM. I came from, I had my own company. And the two things that I see that are different is like nonprofit and government put more focus on relationships, and for-profit put more focus on financial results. And that's not necessarily bad. They have two different purposes. So, I do see, we're talking a lot about the relationship stuff because that's really the people are more interested in here. So that's the alignment part. We need to get alignment. We need to say that but the other thing that I'm really keen on is we don't have a lot of time. And so we need to move faster. And so how do we move faster? That's really what I mean. When I say transition, it's like get over the, differences we've had. How do we get aligned? And so they have different reasons, that's okay. They have different reasons for getting there, but if we agree where there is, then how do we move there as fast as possible? That's my question, is what do you guys think we need to do to transition as fast as possible to a brighter energy future is the way I would say it.
I'll just weigh in very quickly. I do think one of the keys that's necessary for people to basically get over what I think are, in many cases, sort of small squabbles, it is understanding the severity of the situation. I had the privilege to go to Paris for the climate talks last November and December. On my own nickel, to make that clear, I did not spend any taxpayer dollars doing that. But it was really interesting. It was the largest gathering of mayors in the history of the world, I think. Wow. And listening to the mayors of many of the coastal cities, it was very clear they have a keen sense of urgency. And the gathering of the representatives of cities and regions was convened by former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who really got how serious the situation was when Superstorm Sandy hit the East Coast, inundated Wall Street, knocked out electricity, wiped out huge portions of the eastern seaboard, and caused them all to look very differently at the impact of rising seas and the impact it'll have on some of the most valuable real estate in the world. So understanding the urgency of the threat, I think, is a key thing for us to all start to get flat. We aren't talking about theoretical. We're not talking that, maybe in our grandchildren's lifetime the lake might go dry again. We're now in a flash drought. happen that fast. Literally, the weather meteorologist is saying we're in flash drought. So the cycling of the extremes of weather become just more and more severe. So I just think we've got to get, I guess, honest about the severity of the threat so that we understand we're all in this. It doesn't matter how much money you have or how much real estate you own. If the water supply dries up in this region, everybody hurts. Your real estate isn't worth anything anymore. You can't drink money. So I think we've really got to understand the severity of the threat and the fact that it is an existential threat. The mayor talks about the road congestion being an existential threat. The real existential threat is the region will run out of water, and probably sooner than people think. We will experience massive wildfire impact. So I just think that's a really critical starting point, and it's really hard to talk to people about. People don't want to think about things that are such enormous threats to their well-being. And to me, that's the hard part. I've had a lot of friends say, "You're a real day brightener, I gotta go." They don't really want to talk about it.
What's the positive vision? People like positive visions. That's
Right,
what we have to get
it's
to.
the preparedness. It's what we can do to protect our families and our homes and be better prepared.
Yeah.
Very quickly, I mean, there's a paradox here that I think we need to address your question. I think on the, and this is something I struggle with, by the way. I'm not telling you to believe this. This is something that I go back and forth with. On a short-term basis, you do have to put a cost on everything and start to look in a capitalist world, in a neoliberal capitalist world, in a very individual world. You have to see the price in dollars and cents and speak the language of money. And maybe that actually can, on a short-term basis, get us out of some of our major problems, or at least mitigate some of them. The paradox that I struggle with is that's not a long-term solution. We cannot continue to talk about how we own everything, how there's individual ownership of air or water or property or whatever, biodiversity, which the UN says we should provide some biodiversity. That'll protect biodiversity. That's a short-term measure of a much bigger problem. And it's so easy to dismiss things like what Daniel said, that we need to change our mindset. Because people immediately go, well, that's not going to happen. I mean, we live in a capitalist world, so it's just not going to happen. But actually, I think we need, and especially with our kids, start to ask these questions early on. You know, should you own that piece of property? Should you own the water on it? Should you own oil on it? And maybe we do need to have this kind of very basic level education.
It's already happening with automobiles. I think a lot of young people are saying, I don't have to own an automobile.
You're seeing generational shifts in other things as well.
No, that was awesome. I was just going to mention something we haven't really talked about, that in a practical matter, also elections matter, and it's clear that electing good people who are climate champions is one of the fastest ways we can actually get action done. And so, especially when you look at just say the Clean Power Plan, where President Obama has proposed or implemented the largest ever limit on carbon pollution in U.S. history from power plants. The Supreme Court has now stated whoever the next president is will elect the tiebreaker on the Clean Power Plan. And we know Hillary Clinton has said she will, is a strong climate advocate. Donald Trump has said he will repeal it and even do away with the EPA. So that's just one kind of stark contrast there, but it's also true at the local and state level as well. We have to be electing good people. And if we elect good people, it makes it a lot easier to, you have to do less of the organizing because you've already got the people there that are going to make the thing happen.
Your vote matters unless you live in Texas.
So I want to give the option of continuing the conversation, but I also want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's already 8:20. It's sneaking up on, I think, 8:20. Is that correct? It snuck up on us. I got lost in the conversation. So what's the consensus? Would you guys prefer to adjourn and be able to ask and question and comment on an individual basis? Because I don't think everyone's going to run for the door the second that we adjourn. So that'll give everyone a chance to continue. So does that seem like a good idea at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, we have wine, we have beer, we have snacks, we have people.